husband and I's family are mad we won't choose someone to spend the holiday with. My husband and I both come from families that have been torn apart in different ways. It's a kind of complicated, tangled web, one that neither of us ever thought we'd end up navigating, but here we are, and it's exhausting. My husband's family dynamic is a little more, well, let's just say unconventional. His mom and dad were never married, and his dad, a quiet, reclusive man, has never cared much for the idea of socializing outside his home. He prefers staying on his property with his animals, leading a life that feels in a way disconnected from the rest of the world. I've never been able to get comfortable around him because he keeps to himself so much, but it's clear that he has his own sense of peace in that, and I respect it, although I wish he didn't let it create so much distance. His mom and stepdad live 5.5 hours away from us, and while I have nothing against his stepdad personally, there's a tension that's always simmered just beneath the surface, not only with me, but also with his mom's side of the family. His step-siblings aren't exactly my biggest supporters. There's this long-standing friction between them that I'm not really part of, but it still makes family gatherings feel, well, strained. It's a little complicated, and to be honest, I've tried to keep my distance. It's not as though anything terrible ever happened. It's more like these unspoken grievances over things like how my husband was treated as a child. His step-siblings were punished for even the smallest mistakes, while my husband, being the youngest, was more or less given a free pass. It sounds trivial, but those differences have left scars that have yet to heal. Then there's my family. My parents have been divorced for years, and as you can imagine, that creates its own set of challenges. I don't speak to my mom anymore, not after everything that's gone on between us. My dad and aunt, who hadn't spoken for a long time, have recently started trying to rebuild some kind of connection. And despite everything, they decided to hold Christmas this year at my grandmother's vacation home, 2.5 hours away from us. So instead of a cozy, close-knit gathering, it felt like a chore to even think about making the trip. For the past 3 years that my husband and I have been together, we've bent over backward trying to please everyone, trying to make sure no one is left out. It's been incredibly draining. Last year, for example, we spent Christmas Day bouncing from one family to the next. We drove up 2 days before Christmas to see his parents. It wasn't ideal, but we made it work, and then we drove back home after lunch on Christmas Day to see my mom for a short while. After that, we had dinner with my dad and stepmom, and then somehow we had a second dinner with my grandparents. To top it all off, we went to his grandparents' house afterward, and guess what? We had to eat again. By the time we finished that night, I was physically and emotionally drained. I remember looking at my husband and just saying, never again. We were exhausted, both physically from all the driving and mentally from trying to keep everyone happy. And it wasn't just the physical toll, it was the emotional weight of it all. Each family had their own expectations, and no matter what we did, we could never make everyone feel satisfied. It felt like a never-ending cycle of appeasing people who, in the end, weren't really listening to what we needed or wanted. Now, with Christmas approaching again, the pressure has only built. In the weeks leading up to the holiday, we've been bombarded with phone calls, texts, and messages asking about our plans. Everyone wants to know what we're doing, but the truth is, we haven't even figured it out ourselves. Every time we talk about it, we end up in a heated discussion, and every single decision seems to upset somebody. His mom is disappointed because she feels like we're not giving her enough attention, and she's sad that we don't want to spend the holiday in the way she envisioned. But what she doesn't understand is that it's exhausting to drive so far to be around people who, frankly, don't really like us. Her side of the family has never made an effort to get to know me or my husband. It's always been about their traditions and expectations, and that leaves us feeling like we're on the outside looking in. And then there's my stepmom. She's frustrated because she feels like we didn't get them for Thanksgiving. But what she doesn't realize is that she was the one who decided to celebrate Thanksgiving 2.5 hours away. She couldn't understand why we didn't make it, but in my mind, I felt like I was stuck in this impossible position of trying to please everyone, and it was never going to work. We've reached a point where the idea of Christmas has become a source of anxiety rather than joy. I think about our past few holidays, and it's clear that we've both been running ourselves ragged, trying to be everywhere and do everything for everyone, and it's simply not sustainable. This year, we've decided that we want to have a different kind of Christmas. My husband's work is seasonal, and by the time the holidays roll around, he's usually worn out. And with my school schedule, I only get 2 weeks off. Those 2 weeks have become sacred to us, our time to relax, recharge, and just be together. I don't want to spend that time running all over the place trying to meet everyone's expectations. His mom brought it up again today. She mentioned that his grandparents are upset because we haven't made a decision yet. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. I couldn't take it anymore. I told her that we haven't made a decision because we've been harassed about it for weeks, with everyone telling us how upset they are. And honestly, it just isn't fair to us. It's not fair to be constantly pulled in different directions, to feel like we have to apologize for wanting a peaceful holiday. At this point, I just want to shut everything out. I would much rather sit at home with my husband, just the two of us, and enjoy a quiet Christmas. I could cook something simple, or we could order food, watch Christmas movies, and just have a peaceful day together. It would be the most magical Christmas I've ever had. No pressure, no expectations, just love and warmth between us. I just wish they would understand that it's not fair to expect us to run around everywhere to please them. We have a right to our own time, our own traditions, and our own space. This holiday season, we're finally going to put our needs first, and that's the most liberating decision we've made in years. Update 1. After the heated conversation with my mother-in-law, I thought everything was clear, but the next morning, we received a message from my husband's aunt with a passive-aggressive tone. Christmas is about family reunion, not avoiding responsibilities. That message made my blood boil. Everyone feels entitled to make demands, but no one understands the pressure we've been under. I decided not to respond because the more I explained, the worse it would get. But not long after, my stepmother called. Her voice was cold and firm. Do you think this is okay? We've sacrificed so much to make this Christmas happen, and you and your husband can't even make a short drive to join us? I tried to stay calm, but her tone made me feel like an irresponsible child. Mom, 2.5 hours is not short considering our schedule. My husband and I need time for ourselves. Time for yourselves? You've had the whole year for yourselves. This is the time for family. I felt cornered. On the other end of the line, I heard my father trying to intervene, but my stepmother dismissed him. I just wanted to hang up. That night, when my husband came home tired from a long day at work, I told him everything. He sat in silence for a moment, then said, "You know, sometimes I feel like we're never enough. What do they want from us? How do we please everyone?" He was right. No one truly cared about what we needed. They only cared about us meeting their expectations. But the storm didn't stop there. A day later, my husband's grandfather called for the first time this year. "What are you two planning? Don't you see that if you don't show up, you're ruining the family tradition?" His voice had a serious tone, more like a warning than a complaint. He had always been someone my husband respected, but those words felt like a dagger to his self-esteem. After the call ended, my husband slammed the phone down on the table, his face flushed with frustration. "I've tried so hard, but even Grandpa doesn't get it. They don't need us. They just need us to be puppets for their so-called traditions." We decided that instead of running away, we would confront it head-on. We wrote an email to both families, with a tone stronger than ever before. The email not only stated that we wouldn't be attending any events, but also demanded that our boundaries be respected. We knew this email would stir up a storm, but this was no longer about Christmas. It was about our right to rest and live our lives the way we wanted to. The next day, the storm came faster than we had anticipated. The phone rang constantly. A message from my stepmother popped up. "Congratulations, you've just broken everyone's heart in the family." Another message from my husband's aunt. "It's shameful that our family has selfish people like you." I put the phone down, my hands shaking, but this time I didn't feel guilty. Instead, I felt like I had just shattered a cage. The tension didn't subside, but we decided to take action. On a cold Christmas morning, my husband and I wrapped ourselves in blankets, ordered a hot meal through an app, and watched Home Alone. It was the first time in many years that I felt true peace. No matter how angry our families were, we knew we had done the right thing. For the first time, Christmas was ours and only ours. Update 2. On Christmas morning, just as my husband and I were about to sit down and enjoy a simple breakfast with a hot cup of coffee, his phone rang. It was his mother, and this time she wasn't giving us any chance to avoid the conversation. My husband switched the phone to speaker mode, and her voice came through sharp and full of anger. "Do you really think this is okay? You're abandoning the family on the most important day of the year? Do you know that your grandfather cried? He thinks you no longer respect the family." My husband closed his eyes and took a long breath. He answered, his voice trying to remain calm. "Mom, my wife and I are also family. We need some time to ourselves. I don't want to upset anyone, but we can't keep doing this." "Family!" she almost yelled. "The family you're talking about is something you've created by hurting the people who raised you. If I had known you would change like this after getting married, I would never have agreed in the first place." I could feel my anger rising, but I held it in. My husband, pale and visibly shaken, interjected, "Mom, don't talk about my wife like that. This isn't just about you, it's about us too. We're exhausted." Before I could even gather myself after the call, the doorbell rang. We glanced at each other, neither of us expecting any visitors. When I opened the door, I saw my step-parents standing there, their faces tense with frustration. "We need to talk," my stepmother said immediately, not even waiting to be invited inside. They walked in without acknowledging our reluctant greeting, and my father, who is usually calm, couldn't hide his irritation today. "Why can't you understand that family is the most important thing?" my stepmother started, her tone almost accusatory. I could feel my breath growing heavier, but before I could respond, my husband spoke up. "We understand, but family shouldn't be a place where people feel pressured or disrespected." That comment was like throwing gasoline on the fire. My stepmother retorted, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "It's so convenient to say that, isn't it? You just want to avoid responsibility and do things your way." The tension reached a boiling point when the phone rang again. This time, it was my husband's grandfather. I thought to myself, how much more can we take? The call was the final straw. The grandfather, someone my husband respected deeply, not only expressed his disappointment, but also said that my husband had betrayed the family. Those words hit my husband like a punch to the gut. After the call ended, he looked at me, his eyes red with emotion. I could see he was trying to stay strong, but it was clear that this had pushed us beyond our limits. I decided it was time for us to take more decisive action. In the heavy silence of that evening, I grabbed my phone and posted a message in the family group chat. "This Christmas, we've chosen to spend time together, to rest and enjoy our married life without the pressure from anyone. We care about everyone, but the unreasonable expectations and constant criticism are only pushing us further apart. This is our final decision. We hope everyone understands and respects it." The message was immediately met with a flurry of responses. Complaints, sarcasm, and even disappointment flooded the phone screen. But this time I didn't feel scared. My husband placed his hand on my shoulder and quietly said, "Thank you. I think this is the first time I feel like I'm living for myself." That evening, in the warm glow of the lights, we curled up in our blanket, watched Love Actually, and had a simple dinner that I made. Although the storm still raged outside, I knew we had just overcome the greatest challenge in our marriage. And the most important thing, we had chosen our own happiness. Update 3. The next day, when I woke up, my husband was still sound asleep next to me. I looked at him, my heart suddenly tightening with a feeling of emptiness. Even though we had just had a wonderful evening together, something still felt unresolved. A part of me couldn't escape the blameful words of the family. Although we had decided not to participate in those gatherings anymore, I still felt heavy-hearted about what had happened. I quietly got out of bed and walked to the kitchen. The morning light streamed through the window, illuminating the paintings on the wall that we had created together. I turned on the stove and began preparing breakfast. The sense of peace I usually felt was now disrupted by the conflicting thoughts within me. A moment later, as I was pouring coffee into my cup, the phone rang again. Looking at the screen, I saw that it was my mom calling. For a moment, I hesitated. After all the tension and conflict, I had decided not to speak with her anymore. But today, I felt something urging me. Maybe this was the chance to change everything. I tapped the answer button. "Mom," I started, my voice gentle, "we need to talk." My mom was silent for a moment before answering, her tone softening, as though she had already prepared herself for this conversation. "I know I've made mistakes. I'm sorry. I didn't realize that you and your husband felt this way." Her apology stunned me. How long had it been since I'd heard sincerity in her voice? Although I didn't want to, part of me wanted to believe her. A strange feeling of confusion flooded through me. "Mom," I choked, "I'm sorry too. I was too harsh and decisive, but honestly, I just wanted things to be better for all of us." A moment of silence passed. Then my mom spoke, her voice much softer now. "You're right. Our family is not what it used to be, and I can't keep pushing you into decisions that are wrong. I want everyone in the family to love and respect each other." I didn't know what to say, just feeling the mixed emotions swirling within me. We both remained silent for a few seconds, but this silence wasn't as heavy as before. It felt like a quiet understanding between the two of us, even though we hadn't completely resolved everything. At least we were trying. After the call, I felt a new wave of emotions wash over me. A feeling of relief, like waves gently lapping at the shore after days of stormy weather. I looked at my husband sitting on the couch, the warm light glowing on his face. He smiled as though he already knew things were going to change. "How do you feel?" he asked, his voice warm. "I'm not sure," I admitted. But I feel like we can't keep living in this anger and disappointment. I think maybe it's time for us to find a way to change. My husband nodded and took my hand. He didn't say anything else, but I knew he understood. This wasn't just anyone's story, it was ours, both of ours. The next day, we decided to do something different. We called the entire family and told them that we would host a small gathering on New Year's Day just with our closest family members, and it would all take place at our home. No grand events, no expectations for tense encounters. We just wanted to create a peaceful space where everyone could talk and understand each other more. When the call ended, I looked into my husband's eyes, and our gazes seemed to speak all the unspoken words. Things may not be perfect yet, but at least we were heading in the right direction. And in that moment, I realized something important. Happiness isn't a battle to please everyone, it's the choice to do what makes us feel peaceful and loved. Update 4. On New Year's Day, we prepared for the gathering at our home with a completely different mindset than before. We had chosen a peaceful morning, free from noise or tension, just with our closest family and loved ones. There was a strange sense of excitement and relief, as if everything had gradually unraveled within us. That day, everyone arrived on time, and from the moment they stepped into the house, the atmosphere was completely different from the usual dull parties. There were no fake conversations or forced smiles. Everything was filled with intimacy and sincerity. I could feel this clearly from the first hugs, from the endless stories people shared. No one was in a rush or trying to please anyone. We simply wanted to spend time together and truly listen to one another. My mom came with my dad. At first, I noticed my mom seemed a bit tense, but when she saw me, she smiled gently. At that moment, I also saw the change in her eyes. Regret, a deep understanding of what had happened. My husband and I cooked the meal together, and cheerful laughter spread throughout the room. No one was trying to argue or condemn one another. The tensions and conflicts slowly faded away with the jokes, with the honest sharing about life. And most importantly, we began to realize that family isn't about perfection, but about going through difficult moments together and learning to love and accept each other, even when it isn't always easy. When everyone sat down to eat dinner, I looked around and felt a strange sense of peace. Yes, it wasn't perfect, but we had found a way to live in love, not to please others, but to feel at peace with ourselves. As the dinner party came to an end, my husband and I sat together in a corner of the room. He took my hand, his gaze full of affection, as if we had come a long way to reach this understanding. "I think we did the right thing," he said softly.
Yeah, I think so too, I smiled, feeling a deep sense of calm. In the end, we've learned how to live for ourselves, and we no longer need to chase anyone else's expectations.
These words weren't just words, they were a promise to each other. A promise that we would not let conflicts or family expectations cloud the happiness and peace we had built. That day, we not only had a warm meal, but we also reached an important turning point in our lives. A turning point that helped us understand that happiness isn't about what others want, but about what we create for ourselves. And from that moment on, we learned to love not only each other, but also our family in a completely new way. Not from blame or expectations, but from understanding, forgiveness, and love. From that day on, our family gatherings became different. No more tense or exhausting parties. We no longer needed to please anyone, and ironically, that was the key to building lasting, happy relationships. And that evening, as we sat side by side, relaxed and smiling, I knew that everything had been resolved. We had found peace within ourselves, and perhaps that was the greatest gift we could give each other in this life.